Hello, everybody. Welcome to the February issue of the Node Bootstrapping Working Group in the ClusterAPI project. We are a working group in ClusterAPI, which is a CNCF project, and as such, we adhere to the CNCF Code of Conduct. Basically, be nice to each other, don't speak over each other. If you feel that you need to have a comment to something someone's saying, raise your hand. Otherwise, if people stop talking, it's fine to start talking. We don't usually have that here because we're a very small loop. And that said, you're looking at the meeting minutes right here. We're going to start. I'll share the minutes in our meeting chat so people can click and can record their attendance. So please go here and tell us who you are, what project you're working on, and maybe an associated company as well. That is as soon as I find the chat. Here we go.
In the meantime, I'll say that I messaged Fabrizio, who is very important, I think, for these kind of meetings, especially today, because we've had some discussions on Slack regarding one repo, multiple repos for the new Bootstrap provider that we're working on for Ignition. So yeah, and Stefan is also important, obviously, because he's also part of this discussion and a maintainer. So yeah, but at least one maintainer, I think, is pretty critical for this meeting to be effective. Maybe I'll message Stefan too.
Absolutely. So I think Stefan is the right one to ping here. Fabrizio noted that he can't make it today, but
wasn't aware. Okay.
Having Stefan join, I agree, is important. Okay. All right. Do we have any open to-dos? Sure, I can probably scale it down a little now. Yeah, that's actually okay. That's straightforward. Johannan, you are working on a KubeVirt setup and corresponding documentation for running Flatcar locally. A little bit of background: Flatcar configures only once at provisioning time from the init RD. So there are like significant changes you can make to the node before provisioning, but it's considerably hard to emulate in Docker alone because the init RD doesn't run. So Johannan was investigating a KubeVirt setup. Maybe you give us an update on that?
Yeah, it's basically ready. The PR is not merged yet. I did get quite a lot of feedback, and I think I've handled all of it. So as far as I'm concerned, I'm ready for another round of review and hopefully approval.
Cool. Could you share the
PR? What's that?
Can you share the PR?
Yeah, so it's 11697. I can paste the link somewhere.
Yes, please.
Let me do it here.
Very nice. Good? Yeah, that's good. That's good stuff.
All right.
Cool. Nice. Yeah.
Yeah, so we ended up I got pretty good feedback. Initially, I added a whole bunch of instructions and tabs in the document, but then someone, who was it? Anyway, I got feedback that why are we adding a whole bunch of instructions rather than just adding code? And that was very much to the point. I removed most of the instructions and just basically added we already had an existing script for a capd based kind setup. So I added an equivalent one for KubeVirt. And then I reuse the logic following some more feedback so that we have one big script that does most of the stuff and then a capd specific one that does just the capd stuff and a capk one that does the KubeVirt stuff. So yeah, I'm I'm pretty satisfied with the result because we just have a make command for capd and a make command for capk that we can run and everything works. So yeah, this is where it is.
Cool. It's always nice to see this fallout from work and making everybody's life better. I could imagine, just remembering yesterday's Cluster API meeting, where some folks spoke up on their virtualized setup, that there's some cross-pollination that we could exploit here. That's good.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So if folks don't join, that's fine as well. Could you give us a rough, since you basically being the main driver and the main implementer of the refactoring, like what's the current status apart from the I think we can kind of factor out the repo separation because there's a number of non-technical issues to address.
Yeah. Yeah, go ahead. I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, that's good.
I was just agreeing. All right.
Perfect. What's our status on the technical side?
Yeah, so I'm basically done moving all of the shared or common fields from kubeadm config spec, at least all the ones that I could figure out they're shared. There was one deprecated field called, I need to pull up my code editor, but use experimental retry join. This one is not allowed in its specific as far as I can tell, but I haven't migrated it to a shared data structure because it's deprecated. So I thought I might as well just not add that in the new provider that we're creating. We basically have in my feature branch, of course, there's no PR yet. We have a kubeadm based config. This is like a new struct. It is embedded, as in Go embedded inside kubeadm config spec, which means that anything under kubeadm based config naturally compiles as if it were a direct field under kubeadm config spec, which is good because it allows us to move and shuffle things around without the users noticing. Because when you run make generate, there are zero differences to the CRDs. So the CRD is exactly the same. Under the hood, some things changed, like there were some test cases, mostly test cases basically, that I needed to edit and refactor a little bit because now we sometimes have to explicitly refer to the embedded, like by name, refer to the embedded new struct. Another tricky bit was conversions because the Cube Builder framework that we're using for like migrating to new API versions, etc., it has its own logic. And the moment, for example, when you move from version A to version B, and there is a field which exists in version B but doesn't exist in version A, then some things are not automatically generated because the framework tries to auto-generate as much code as it can. It looks like generated Go code, but then you need to do manual migrations when the framework is not smart enough to figure out how to do things automatically. And in this case, turns out that moving field to an embedded struct is completely equivalent to removing fields in one type and adding new fields in the other type, as far as the framework is concerned. I personally haven't found a way around that. If someone who watches the recording or someone on the call knows how to work around that, that would be amazing. But basically, what I did was almost copy pasting the code, the auto-generated code that was removed by make generate, and added it in conversion.go, which is the file where you add manual conversions for each type. And we had two versions to do this, V1 Alpha 3 and V1 Alpha 4, which are the as far as I can tell, the two like backward compatible versions that we're still keeping around because the current version is V1 Beta 1. So the change is done in V1 Beta 1. I hope that's correct. This is where I figured I should make the change, and then the two previous versions need manual conversions. So that all of that is done. Now what I'm trying to do is I've been discussing things with Fabrizio and with Stefan, and Util also chimed in regarding a new repository. The reason I'm even looking into that is I got to a case where I have a nice fancy new data structure that I can basically import in the new controller, the new Bootstrap provider that we're going to create. But now the question is, like, where do I create this new Bootstrap provider? And more specifically, I need to create a new CRD. And that new CRD is going to be equivalent of kubedm config, but just for ignition. So probably it will be named something like kubedm config ignition. And then the one without the name of the provisioner, kubedm config, is just going to be the existing cloud init one, because we cannot rename that because this is user facing. And I need to know where to create the CRD and probably do a whole bunch of changes to make all of the CABPK logic importable from a new Go module. Now, since we're talking about Go modules, as far as Go is concerned, I'm putting aside things like administration and CI and all that. Go doesn't care so much where the code sits, because whether we're using a separate repo or a new package in the existing repo or something like that, I think importing is going to look identical. But there are things that we're going to have to do for sure. For example, anything that has the word internal in its import path, we cannot just import in a new module because Go doesn't allow that. So we might have to move some stuff around. And I suspect, I'm not 100% positive on that, but I suspect that if we go the new repo route, then we might have to do even more things in order to import things that are internal, because I think there are at least some cases, I could be wrong here, but I think there are at least some cases where having everything in the same directory, like same file system basically, and not relying on imports like via Go modules, Git, stuff like that, then I think it's going to be simpler in some cases, but there is a strong push from maintainers to go the separate repo route, and there have been made some good arguments in that direction. I think it has pros and cons, obviously, as nearly everything, but yeah, I'm looking in that direction right now because I don't see a point in like going against the grain and trying to really insist that we do it in tree, but I don't know, maybe we can discuss this briefly here, even though I really wanted to have either Fabrizio or Stefan on the call. Let me see, I think Stefan answered me on Slack. Oh, it is in the same meeting as Fabrizio, so they're not going to be joining. They have an internal company meeting. So yeah, maybe let's just discuss it briefly here and people can watch the recording. So as far as I can tell, and I'll try to advocate for both sides here, the reason we want to create a new, so the reason we want to move the new provider, or create the new provider rather, in a new repository is because, first of all, this is the current CAPA standard. And for example, just like we have many infrastructure providers, CAP A, CAP Z, whatever, in separate repos, then that should be the same model as far as CAPA is concerned, because it allows you to have a nice separation of concerns, and maintainers of one component can own their code like nicely separated and demarcated based on repository rather than like subdirectories within the same repo. So that's like one thing. What else? I think that some of the maintainers are concerned with Ignition not being maintained properly or in a timely manner. And if you do that in tree, you might like impede the whole core CAPI development process. This hasn't been said explicitly as far as I can tell, but I'm sensing between the lines that this is like one of the concerns. And I'm getting a little bit of, and again, I'm sorry if I'm reading between the lines, but I'm getting a little bit of a vibe which says something like, let's get rid of this Ignition mess and put it aside so that it doesn't bother us, and let like the mainstream keep using cloud init. So and we want to basically get Ignition out of the way, because right now Ignition is in tree, but it is marked as experimental in feature flag. So I definitely understand that. And now I'm jumping to the other side. I understand that, but I think that I'm worried that moving Ignition, the Ignition provider, to a new repository while keeping the Cloud Init flavored provider in the core repository is gonna sort of signal to users that Cloud Init is the way to go. Now, granted, Cloud Init is, as far as I can tell, much more common than Ignition. I think it's also like more mature than Ignition in terms of time in the market. I'm not sure, Tilo, maybe you know, but and also it is the default. Like where Ignition was added second, there is no question about that. But as far as I can tell, Cluster API isn't sold on a specific canonical technology, for example. So yes, we use Ubuntu by default, but it doesn't mean that ClusterAPI, for example, only uses Ubuntu or specifically even recommends Ubuntu as a host operating system. And same thing with Cloud Init, which is also, I think, a canonical project. And as far as I understand, ClusterAPI wants to be flexible, doesn't want to constrain users to specific technology. And we could say here, yeah, we're not really constraining. We're just putting stuff in your repository. But I still think that having a separate repo for Ignition for the Ignition provider will signal users, at least subconsciously, that this is like not really the way to go. This is like a special case. And I'm also worried a little bit about discoverability, because if we said, look, we're going to break out all the provisioning related code to separate repos, and we're going to have, we're going to move also the Cloud Init code out of tree to its own repo, then yeah, I understand. But we're not going to do that. And the reason is because for testing purposes, namely integration testing, we have to have at least one, like a bootstrap provider in tree, and also an infrastructure provider in tree, which is capd. Now we also have kubevert, but capd is there. So the bottom line is, if we move to a new repo, then we're going to have CABPK, which is the first thing that the users are going to see in the docs and on GitHub. And then there is another repository that users need to somehow learn about or figure out it exists for the Ignition path. So I'm not advocating that Ignition should be the default. I think that the default, it makes a lot of sense that the more popular setup needs to be the default. And as far as I can tell, that's Ubuntu with Cloud Init. But I do want, and I'm saying it very forthrightly, I do want Ignition to be a first-class citizen, not like a small, tiny niche use case that we're putting on the side, because it's not just Flatcar. There is a whole bunch of Linux distros that, for whatever reason, chose Ignition as their provisioner, and I think that it is of interest to the CAPI project as a whole, and also to CAPI users, to have first-class support for these use cases as well. So yeah, this is basically my long speech regarding one repo versus two repos. But all of that said, I'm going with the current recommendation of the maintainers, which is create a new repo. And I'm hoping that we can bridge the discoverability gap and all of that using very good documentation. So maybe that should be enough. Any questions or comments about that?
I see Matt has his hand raised.
Yeah, I think that's very well summarized. The other con I would add is just there's a significant amount of overhead to having a separate repo. Like we have to, do the whole Kubernetes dance and have maintainers and make sure that someone's paying attention. And I know that's a large part of the motivation for putting it out of tree is that, we can't effectively put this on the existing maintainers. They really can't take any more. But that's another big con. Having said that, I think you're right in judging. I think you're exactly right in judging which way the wind is blowing, and I don't think it's worth, fighting the good fight. It does, to some extent, send a signal that it's not the same first-class citizen as, Cloud Init. But like Fabrizio, I guess, said here, as long as it's documented in CAPI at the same level, parallel, and as long as the tooling. I think that's all we can ask for, because we can't really, it doesn't seem reasonable to propose that Cloud Init be out of tree. That would break the world, I think.
Yeah, very good point regarding maintaining another repo. I think that's actually the first thing that I said when discussing this, but I forgot to mention it here, so thanks.
So it's pretty frustrating, but I think I agree with what I think you were saying, which is we should probably just go with what the maintainers want.
The last thing is, I don't see that repository to be part of the Kubernetes SIG, at least not from the start. So we would be like somewhere, because no one of us is a maintainer in the Kubernetes SIG and can create repos there, or can just act. We would basically need to go through all of the process of proposing that thing to the Kubernetes project, becoming part of the GitHub org, becoming integrated, and then, as you said, basically laying out the maintainers' philosophy and all of the contribution parts that are already well defined in Cluster API upstream. So in order to even just bridge that gap, we would need to move out of Kubernetes 6 entirely and then probably land somewhere likely in the Flatcar org or in just the plain GitHub repo, and that would strongly impede visibility.
Sorry, maybe I missed what you said. Are you saying that because of lack of permissions, we can't create the repo there now? Because if that's the thing, then I'm sure we can just make sure we have the right access. Yeah.
Oh, that makes
could,
sure
but
that for sure. I think there's a process. There's like a well-defined process, but we need to, go through that process. And I don't know how fast Kubernetes SIG processes are. I know that CNCF processes can take years because I went through one. And yeah, that was a larger one than just getting a repo in the Kubernetes SIG. But we need to bridge that gap as well. It's not just an effort. We will be entirely off the radar for likely months. And we need to move somewhere, right? And then maybe establish that other somewhere, which might be the Flatcar org on GitHub, as like the new temporary home of that extension in particular, and then go all the way back or not, or anyways. It's non-technical, but on a community level, and that's kind of how I view those things, right? Because I'm not too knowledgeable in Kubernetes technology. I do operating systems, but on a community level, that would be very, very impactful to what we're doing. But yeah.
No, I'm sure we can parallelize. Sorry, go ahead, Matt.
No, just it is tricky because I have experience. That's kind of what they want. I think that's the preferred route is you create a repo somewhere, you show that it has some value and participation, and then you propose that it be brought back into Kubernetes SIGs. And that interim time is pretty difficult. I have a couple mBorisma / repositories that we were hoping would eventually be, and just the fact that they're under my name, we could, makes them a lot harder. People are like, "Is this legit? Is this really part of the project?"
Yeah.
Like, well, we hope so. So it is difficult, but I think that's the way they would want it to proceed.
So you're saying, Matt, that as far as you know, the preferred way is to start with some random repository somewhere and then move that into Kubernetes SIG, because there is, at the very least, there is a whole bunch of Go import paths that are going to need to be rewritten if we do it this way. Whereas if we just start with the right, like in the right place, even if there is like no code there initially, like why do people care if we just create an empty repo and start putting the code there? Does that make sense? If nobody uses it yet.
Well, maybe we could. I mean, maybe you can just propose to SCL that it become a Kubernetes SIGs repository from the get-go if they're already bought in. But the last time we asked, we wanted to create a repository to house Helm charts for various providers, and we had 3 examples of them. But they basically insisted that we just create it somewhere random, and then after it's grown up and shown that there's participation, then we could move it back. So I don't know if this would be in the same case. And we've already.
I would argue that it's a completely. Sorry.
So maybe this has a better argument to just be a Kubernetes SIGs project from the get-go. I'm not sure.
Is there
as far as I can tell, yeah.
Is there really a demand for Go importing the provider module? Is that happening somewhere?
What do you mean by so the thing that we need to import is I'm talking about importing nearly all of the CABPK logic, because we're basically creating a kubeadm bootstrap provider that is like Ignition flavored.
No, I understand that.
Okay.
I meant you didn't want to change repos because it would change the import path for Go.
Yep.
But like, are people importing this provider directly, do you think?
Right, it's a CIC, maybe it's kind of self-contained, ideally, right?
Like, it can happen. I won't deny it. And some people like to do crazy mutant combinations of cluster API providers for their third-party product. But like, as someone who's maintained a provider, like, we were really worried about it, but most people are just interacting with cluster cuddle. They're not importing the Go code directly.
Oh, you have a very good point, Chris, because I was, I mixed it up a little bit. The thing that moves is the consumer side, not the thing that is being consumed, which is the thing that affects the import path. So yeah, I think you're right there. Regarding
some changes would need to happen. I just don't think it is
necessary
disastery.
Yeah,
disasters.
but I wanted to say that I think we do have a pretty good argument to start with in Kubernetes 6, because this is code that is already official CAPI code. Granted, it is marked as experimental, but ignition support is already there. It is in tree. It is experimental, but in the mainstream repo. And then it's not like we're adding something new to the project. We're basically refactoring something out of necessity, like out of following requests from CAPI maintainers who are part of Kubernetes 6, as far as I can tell. So yeah, it's my argument would be I'm very happy to keep the code where it is now, but if we need to move it, let's create a new proper repo under the organization. But yeah, I think technically it doesn't matter so much. This is again maybe more like a political / visibility question regarding where this code should sit. So yeah, I'm fine like being flexible and just starting
Ultimately, I'm
wherever
with
could be
you.
Flatcar.
I think, I
Yeah.
think a provider should be able to use any of the Bootstrap options we have available equally. But
Yeah. And there is one thing that actually is harder. I just thought about it during the conversation. If we have two repos, I'm going to need to test consuming unmerged code from core CAPI for a long time from this new repo, right? Because basically what I'm going to do, I'm going to wreak havoc on many of the modules. I have to, right, move things out of internal, etc. And of course, I cannot merge that because it will just break master or main on core copy. And if it's in the same repo, then I have one branch that has all the changes that are just working. If I have two repositories, then now I have to import, I guess, a feature branch or even specific commits, which I guess I'm pretty sure it's possible, and it is possible in Go modules. But yeah, it is going to make the workflow at least somewhat harder, right? I have to keep like committing things into my future branch in the core repo, then import that in the new repo, update the Go modules, whatever, commit that, and basically like do vendoring or whatever it is. So yeah, that's definitely going to be a little more cumbersome, but I guess that's the price we have to pay. So yeah, well, I'll try to do that. All right. What else?
That's good stuff. Like the clearer we see the work before us, the better we can basically act. So that's good. That's good work here. Cool. Yeah, I don't have anything else. And I'll actually bubble up in the next. I'll take that as a to-do. New to-dos. I'll bubble up in the next cluster API meeting to move the slot of this meeting and put it on a better slot that works for the core cluster API maintainers, which we need in this meeting for guidance.
Cool. You're saying because this slot regularly falls on something that like a recurring thing that some of the maintainers have, or
that's new. So both Fabrizio and Stefan are affected. It
Gotcha.
sounds like a company meeting that they need to attend, and I get it.
Yeah.
It's what puts food on the table, which I keep saying. So that's fine. And I think we can accommodate. I'm aware of everybody's time zones, so I'll try to make it not as demanding. Probably try to kind of keep the 5 p.m. UTC thing, if that works, and come back to you folks and align the new meeting slot.
Cool. Do you want to send a new, what was it called, doodle or something? Like, do you feel a need to poll people again, or you think you have the info and just use whatever we did last time?
I don't know. Whatever people are more comfortable with, if they just give me enough like data or input in the in the cluster API meeting, then I'm fine. If I don't get enough data, then I'm a manager. I know how to get data.
Oh, you want to ask in the office hours, like about the new slot for the work group? Okay.
Yeah.
All right, that's good.
That's the thing. All right. Anyone else? Anything else they want to bubble up?
Yeah, I heard someone.
I want to. I'm just sorry I showed up late. I had sort of a minor emergency happen right at the beginning. I couldn't. But so I'll watch the rest of the recording and catch up. I was wondering. I don't know if we're at this point yet. Would it help for me to go look through the procedure again for how you create a new repo, new SIG SCL and know that better, or is
That
that
would be super
premature?
helpful. Yeah, yeah. I mean,
Okay.
all of the concerns that we're not trying to push back. We're trying to drive clarity, right? So
Yeah.
all of the cons that we identified might or might not be addressable, right? The feeling like a second-class citizen might be addressable by moving Cloud Init in its own repo in the cluster in the Kubernetes SIG and run all of the end-to-end tests in that repo, right? And then we'd coexist and share a load, or any other technical reason, a technical way out here. And information in how to create and operate Kubernetes 6 repos will absolutely address some of the concerns. So yeah, that would be super valuable.
Okay,
I
I'll,
agree.
I'll try and do some research there and maybe talk to Fabrizio if I can. And then
Thanks. Yeah.
just to
Appreciate it.
update, because I finally got to where I have KubeVirt and stuff working. I commented a little on your PR. You probably saw, Johanna, although you made a lot of changes since then
Yep.
to the tilt
The tilt one.
PR.
Yeah.
Uh,
Hmm.
and then I've been trying to build as the instructions you gave me like 2 weeks ago. I've been trying to catch up with that, but I ran into an error, and then I noticed you changed the branch, and so I pulled the branch, and I haven't gotten back to retesting. So that's where I'm at. So
Yeah.
I'm trying to catch up with you so I can give some meaningful feedback, but I have made some progress. I know I said that last week, but
No, it's all good. No rush, and yeah, I appreciate the effort. Don't worry, I'm making progress in the meantime, and it's all good. And whenever, if and when your feedback arrives, I'm sure it's going to be useful. So
yeah. And if you have
yeah, don't
anything
worry.
really specific that you need some feedback on, feel free to PM me, and I could probably drop things in, or
I did need help with the conversions, but I just figured things out eventually on my own. It just took some time because I didn't have a lot of experience with that specific part of CAPI. Yeah, well, like right now, I don't have any concrete question. I'm not stuck with anything. I basically need to start creating this new repository. I'll just create it somewhere, even a local directory for now, and start like basically integrating things, right? Like create a new project and then figure out what changes I need to do to pull the shared data from core copy and like what modules need to move out of internal so that we can import them and stuff like that. The hard part is definitely going to be figuring out a way to expose nearly all of the logic of CABPK and make it importable in a new repository without breaking CABPK. So that's like
yeah,
the thing that we need to, that's a big thing we need to do. And we don't want to copy paste code. We want to import a module and have a very, very thin like wrapper or something, like a very thin layer in addition to the exported code in the current CABPK. So like right now it's basically a monolith. We want to figure out where to put like a cut, like a slice, make everything under that cut exportable and then importable in a new repo without interfering with the functionality or with the maintenance of CABPK in its current repository. That's like the challenge. And frankly, I have no idea how to do that right now, but I've started looking into it, and I hope we'll come up with a good way of doing that. If you, Matt, or if anybody else have experience with something like that, like a similar task, then yeah, I'm really open to ideas. I'm sure we'll get there at some point, but my feeling is it's going to take quite a lot of thought how to do that properly.
Cool.
yes, sounds tricky.
Yes, and as a reminder, another tricky bit is exactly the same, but with the control plane module, because so far we were only talking about Bootstrap.
True.
So yeah, we have exactly the same concerns there. We'll have to see.
Cool. All right. Great stuff.
Yep.
Anything else we should discuss? Excellent work, folks. See you on Slack.
All right. Thanks a lot.
Bye.